Welcome back to Mind Pump TV, guys. I'm your host, Danny Matrenga, and today we are talking deadlifts. What to do if they're challenging for you. Now, first let's start by deconstructing the deadlift altogether. What you have is essentially a loaded hinge pattern. Now, the hinge is a movement pattern that generally requires some movement at the pelvis. You're gonna get a lot of activation at the hamstrings and the glutes while you stabilize your spine. That's essentially what a hinge is. Some examples of hinges are good mornings, Romanian deadlifts, traditional deadlifts, kettlebell swings. It's a very important pattern that the human body's developed over a long period of time. It's how we pick stuff up. And the deadlift represents a tremendous benchmark or litmus test for testing our strength of that fundamental pattern, right? It tests our ability to stabilize our spine and pick something up with a great deal of force safely. Now, deadlifting can be very difficult. It's quite technical. There's a lot of coaching points, and we've made dozens of videos on that. Now, you still need to train that hinge pattern even while you're learning. So today I'm going to show you my 2 absolute must-know regressions for trainers and trainees alike to be able to build your hinge capacity to be able to deadlift comfortably, or to at least have a place to start if you're a little bit intimidated to approach a barbell. Maybe you're not strong enough to pick a barbell up off the floor, or perhaps you're just looking to build your general capacity with the hinge movement. So without further ado, let's dive into first the short stop deadlift and second the block pull. All right, so when it comes to breaking down that deadlift, like I said, the first fundamental piece is understanding the hinge pattern. The way I like to look at the hinge pattern is simply as a synchronistic rhythm between the lumbar spine and the pelvis, the ability to set the hips back, load the glutes and the hamstrings. It's actually known as the lumbo-pelvic rhythm, and the best way to see it is by just simply placing a dowel back, having 3 points of contact, one with the cervical spine, one with the thoracic, and one with the lumbar, and practicing hinging the hips, loading the posterior chain without losing any of those points of contact. Once you've got that down, you can feel the muscles, you're probably ready to move on to some type of load, either from the floor or from the top down. All right, so the first regression I like to teach for new clients learning how to deadlift is called the short stop deadlift. Now, short stop is, of course, in reference to the infield position in baseball. Usually a short stop before the pitch will get into a position something like this so that they're ready to make a play on the ball in one way or the other. So it's called a short stop deadlift because you set up in a very similar position. So using a dumbbell I found to be easiest. You could also, I guess, use a kettlebell. I call the kettlebell version just a kettlebell deadlift, but when I use a dumbbell, that's when I call it a short stop deadlift. What I do is I set my feet up so that the kettlebell is positioned directly in between both of my feet. I unlock my knees and I hinge at my hips, loading up my posterior chain. I reach down and I grab the dumbbell and I perform a deadlift. What's nice about this for new lifters is you can use a variety of different dumbbells. The only thing you're trying to do is make sure that dumbbell is high enough off the ground so that it's somewhat similar to where a bar would be sitting if it had plates on it. Now, the cool thing about using dumbbells that are a little bit smaller is you can go 10, 15, 20, 25, 35 pounds, whatever you might need to use, because it really is hard to start with a barbell for some people, but you can practice loading that hinge very similarly to if you were doing a barbell deadlift. You just have a much easier way to do it for somebody who's never done it before. So the second regression of the deadlift is a block pull. Now, while it's set up conventionally in the same way as a deadlift, loading a barbell with traditional plates, you'll notice I've set them up on other plates. You can use traditional weightlifting blocks, which are usually made out of wood. You could use some of this rubber flooring if you have some of that lying around, if you have a home gym, for example. Anything that's going to elevate the bar a little bit above where it would be if it was just sitting on the floor. And the reason I like to utilize the block pull is a lot of people have trouble stabilizing their spine in that hinged position. So starting them off a little bit higher gives them the opportunity to get comfortable. It shortens the pull. They're working largely all of the same muscles. Perhaps there's a small bias to the quads because maybe they don't load the posterior chain as well. But it's a great way to eventually get somebody to pulling from the floor. who perhaps doesn't have the proper lumbo-pelvic mobility just yet or spinal stability just yet to really rip the bar off the floor the way we want them to in a deadlift. So I will often deploy the hinge with a dowel, followed by a short stop deadlift for a little bit, moving into a block pull, or maybe even bypassing the block pull altogether, going straight to a deadlift. It just depends on what I'm seeing from a client. But if they have any back pain, picking the bar up from the floor, or if just the general way that they're built to get down to the floor, they have to be totally like parallel with the floor, then what I'll actually do is I'll elevate the bar. They'll probably just pull from blocks always, just so that I have them in that more traditional deadlift setup. And that's something I've had to do with a lot of my taller guys. Just give them a little bit of a block pull to be sure that they're not totally parallel with their big old long legs with a flat spine. So I want to be sure that they're always pulling from a safe position. So remember the continuum is simple. Get your hinge down, practice the short stop deadlift a little bit, then move on to the conventional. If you struggle with the conventional because maybe you're too tall or you're uncomfortable off the floor, back it down, work on some block pulls. Can always throw the RDL in there as well. Great variation. You're just working from the top down on that. Hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, make sure you like, comment below if you have any questions, subscribe to the channel. Thanks again so much for tuning in to Mind Pump TV.